At some point in your life, usually somewhere in your 30s, you begin to notice something subtle. Nothing dramatic happens. There is no collapse, no crisis that forces you to stop. Life keeps moving. You keep showing up. You keep doing what you are supposed to do. And yet, quietly, a question begins to follow you. Not during the busy hours. Not when your calendar is full. It appears in the small spaces. While waiting in line. While washing dishes. While lying in bed before sleep. A simple question. How did I end up here? You don't ask it with anger. You don't ask it with panic. You ask it with a calm confusion. Because from the outside, your life looks fine. You have responsibilities. You have routines. You have a role in the world. People might even say you are doing well. But inside, something feels slightly disconnected. Like you are living a life that fits, but doesn't fully belong to you. This feeling doesn't mean you failed. It doesn't mean you chose wrong. It means you are awake. Most people think feeling lost is a sign of weakness, but often it is the opposite. Feeling lost usually comes after you have followed the rules long enough to realize they don't answer everything. When you were younger, life felt clearer. Study. Improve yourself. Get a job. Be stable. Be useful. Be successful. The path was visible. You could measure progress, grades, titles, salary, achievements. Each step gave you feedback, but somewhere along the way, the measurements stopped working. You reached a level where external progress no longer translated into internal clarity. You climbed the ladder and realized you never asked what the ladder was leaning against. This is where many smart, thoughtful people begin to feel lost, not because they lack direction, but because they have outgrown the directions they were given. Let me ask you something. Have you ever noticed that the more capable you become, the harder it is to choose? When you had fewer options, decisions felt simpler. Now, with experience, awareness, and intelligence, every option comes with consequences you can already see. You know what each path might cost you: time, energy, relationships, freedom. So instead of choosing, you pause. And that pause slowly turns into a feeling of being stuck. This is not procrastination. This is caution mixed with depth. You are no longer impulsive. You are no longer naive. You understand life is complex, and complexity can be paralyzing. Another quiet truth is this. Many people in their 30s are not lost. They are transitioning. But no one prepared us for this transition. School prepared us for exams. Jobs prepared us for tasks. But nothing prepared us for the moment when success stops feeling meaningful. You might wake up one day and realize you are good at something you no longer care deeply about. You can do it well. Others respect you for it. But your heart is no longer fully there. And admitting that feels dangerous. Because what do you do when the life you built works, but doesn't feel alive? So you keep going. You tell yourself to be grateful. You tell yourself not to complain. After all, many people have less. And that makes the confusion even heavier. Because now you feel guilty for feeling lost. You start asking yourself questions like, am I just ungrateful? Is this just adulthood? Should I stop overthinking? But overthinking is not the root. The root is misalignment. Your inner values have shifted, but your outer life hasn't caught up yet. This happens naturally as we mature. When you were younger, approval mattered more, stability mattered more, safety mattered more. As you grow, meaning begins to matter more. Autonomy, integrity, time, presence. But society doesn't slow down to let you realign. So you carry two lives at once, the life you are living and the life you sense you might want. That gap is where the feeling of being lost lives. Here is another question worth sitting with. See, when was the last time you made a decision based on who you are now, not who you used to be? Many people keep using old versions of themselves as reference points, old dreams, old definitions of success, old fears. But you are not the same person anymore. You have seen enough to know what drains you. You have felt enough to know what matters. Ignoring that knowledge doesn't make life easier. It makes it quieter and heavier at the same time. Slowly, a low-level tiredness settles in. Not physical exhaustion, but a kind of emotional fatigue. You are tired of pretending everything is fine, tired of explaining yourself, tired of pushing without knowing why. This tiredness is information. It is not asking you to quit everything. It is asking you to listen. Listening, however, requires stillness. And stillness is something modern life rarely gives us permission to have. So instead, we distract. We scroll. We consume. We stay busy. Busyness becomes a way to avoid asking deeper questions, because deep questions don't come with quick answers. And yet, they don't go away. They wait. They wait for a quiet moment. They wait for honesty. And when you finally slow down enough, they return, asking gently, "What do you actually want now? What kind of life feels honest to you? What are you holding on to that no longer fits?" Feeling lost is not the absence of direction. It is the presence of too many unexamined directions. And this stage is not meant to be rushed. It is meant to be felt. Because clarity doesn't arrive as a lightning strike. It arrives slowly, through small realizations, through discomfort, through noticing what drains you and what restores you. You don't need a 5-year plan right now. You need permission to be in between identities, between seasons, between definitions. This space feels uncomfortable because it has no labels. But it is also where real alignment begins. If you are listening to this and recognizing yourself, know this. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are not wasting time. You are recalibrating. And recalibration always feels like uncertainty before it feels like peace. This stage is not asking you to become someone new. It is asking you to return to yourself, not the version shaped by expectations, but the quieter version shaped by truth. And that journey does not begin with answers. It begins with honesty, with admitting that something inside you is asking for attention, and choosing, gently, to listen. There is another layer to this feeling that often goes unnoticed. It is the quiet pressure of time, not the dramatic kind, not the fear of aging overnight, but the soft ticking in the background of your mind. You begin to feel that time is no longer endless. In your 20s, time felt wide, forgiving, flexible. You could try something, quit, start again. You could make mistakes and still feel early. In your 30s, time changes texture. It feels heavier, more real, more counted. You start thinking in terms of years instead of months. You notice how quickly seasons pass, how fast another birthday arrives. And this awareness does something subtle to your decisions. It makes you cautious, because now every choice feels like it excludes something else. If you go this way, see, you don't go that way. If you commit here, you close a door there. So instead of moving forward, you hesitate. You wait for a sign, for certainty, for the right moment. But certainty doesn't come. And the waiting slowly turns into self-doubt. You begin to question not just your choices, but your ability to choose at all. This is especially common among people who think deeply, because you can see too far ahead. You can imagine consequences before they happen. You can foresee regrets before they exist. So you try to protect yourself from future pain. Ironically, that protection often creates a different kind of pain, the pain of stagnation. Another truth that is hard to admit is this: many people feel lost in their 30s because they are still living inside expectations they never consciously chose. The expectations about what a good life looks like, expectations about success, about stability, about timing. By a certain age, you are supposed to have certain things figured out: a career path, a financial trajectory, a clear role. Even if no one says this out loud, it lives in the air. You absorb it from conversations, from social media, from subtle comparisons. You see others posting milestones, announcing progress, displaying certainty, and you quietly compare your inner confusion to their outer clarity. What you don't see is that many of them are confused too. They just learned how to perform confidence. This performance creates pressure: pressure to look settled, pressure to appear stable, pressure to avoid starting over. So when your inner voice begins to question your direction, you silence it. So you tell yourself it's too late to change, too risky, too irresponsible. But the voice doesn't disappear. It waits. And when ignored long enough, it turns into discomfort, restlessness, a sense of living slightly off-center. Another important question to sit with is this: have you noticed how much of your energy goes into maintaining a version of yourself? A version that makes sense to others, a version that fits expectations, a version that feels explainable. Maintaining that version takes effort. It requires consistency even when your inner landscape is shifting. And over time, that effort becomes exhausting. You start feeling tired without knowing why. You rest, but the tiredness stays. You take breaks, but something still feels heavy. That heaviness often comes from internal misalignment, from carrying a life that no longer matches your inner values. This is why rest alone doesn't fix it, because what you need is not just rest. You need realignment. But realignment feels scary, because it often requires disappointing someone, or redefining success, or letting go of an identity that once felt safe. So instead, many people choose numbness. They keep busy, they stay productive, they distract themselves with routines. On the surface, life looks stable. Inside, something is slowly dimming. Let me ask you something gently. When was the last time you felt genuinely curious about your own life? Not anxious, not pressured, curious. Curiosity is a sign of aliveness. But when life becomes overly structured, curiosity fades. You stop asking open questions. You start optimizing instead. How can I be more efficient? How can I be more productive? How can I make this work? Optimization keeps systems running, but it doesn't necessarily make them meaningful. Meaning requires exploration, and exploration requires uncertainty. Many people in their 30s are not failing. They are standing at the edge of uncertainty, and they were never taught how to stand there. We were taught to move forward, to achieve, to accumulate. We were not taught how to pause without panic, how to listen without rushing, how to be unsure without feeling behind. So when uncertainty arrives, we interpret it as a problem, something to fix, something to escape. But uncertainty is not always a signal to act. Sometimes it is a signal to observe, to notice what no longer fits, to pay attention to discomfort instead of numbing it. Another quiet reason people feel lost is because they confuse clarity with certainty. They think clarity means knowing exactly where they are going, but clarity often begins as knowing what you no longer want. This is a softer form of knowing, less dramatic, less impressive, but more honest. You might not know your next destination, but you know certain environments drain you. You know certain conversations feel empty. You know certain ambitions no longer excite you. This knowledge is not nothing, it is the beginning of alignment. But because it doesn't come with a clear roadmap, it feels incomplete. So you dismiss it. You tell yourself it's not enough to act on. But clarity grows by being respected. When ignored, it stays faint. When listened to, it sharpens. Another layer worth exploring is identity. For many people, their sense of self is tightly connected to what they do, your job, your role, your expertise. So when your relationship with your work changes, your identity shakes. You might still be good at what you do, but it no longer defines you in the same way. This can feel like losing a part of yourself, and loss always brings disorientation. You might ask yourself, if I am not this anymore, then who am I? This question doesn't need an immediate answer, but it does need space. Rushing to redefine yourself often leads to shallow solutions. New labels, new titles, new distractions. But identity is not something you replace overnight. It evolves, and evolution requires patience. One of the hardest things to accept in this phase of life is that not everything meaningful is urgent. Some things need time to unfold, but modern culture values speed, quick decisions, clear outcomes. So moving slowly feels wrong. It feels like falling behind. But sometimes moving slowly is the most honest response. Another gentle truth is this: you might be grieving without realizing it, grieving old dreams, old versions of yourself, old assumptions about how life would feel. Grief doesn't always come with tears. Sometimes it comes as numbness, or confusion, or a quiet sadness you can't explain. You might be grieving the idea that by now, you would feel more certain, more settled, more fulfilled. Letting go of that expectation is painful, but it is also freeing, because once you stop measuring your life against imagined timelines, you can start listening to your real one. Here is something rarely said out loud. Many people feel lost because they are finally becoming honest. Honest about what doesn't work. Honest about what they don't want. Honest about the cost of certain paths. Honesty disrupts comfort, but it creates alignment. And alignment, at first, feels uncomfortable because it asks you to stop pretending, to stop pushing forward on autopilot, to admit that something inside you wants change, even if you don't know what that change looks like yet. This stage of life is not asking you to reinvent everything. It is asking you to simplify, to remove what is unnecessary, to question what feels heavy, to notice what quietly matters. Small shifts come before big ones. Noticing patterns, noticing energy, noticing what brings relief and what brings tension. You don't need to act on everything you notice. But noticing itself is progress, because awareness changes how you move. You might still walk the same path for a while, but you walk it differently, with more honesty, with more presence, with more choice. Feeling lost is often a sign that your inner compass is recalibrating. It doesn't point clearly yet, but it is no longer aligned with old directions. And that in-between space can feel lonely, because not everyone around you understands it. Some will tell you to be practical, to be grateful, to stop thinking so much. But thinking deeply is not the problem. Avoiding listening is. You are allowed to question your life. You are allowed to feel unsure. You are allowed to move slowly. These are not signs of failure. They are signs of consciousness. And consciousness always changes how life feels, even before it changes what life looks like. For now, it is enough to stay present with the questions, to not rush them, to not silence them. Because clarity does not arrive as an answer. It arrives as a sense of quiet rightness, and that sense grows when you give yourself permission to be where you are. Something interesting begins to happen when you stay in this in-between space long enough. At first, it feels uncomfortable, then confusing, and slowly, it becomes revealing. You start to notice patterns you were too busy to see before. Patterns in how you react. Patterns in what drains you. Patterns in what quietly gives you relief. This is not the kind of insight that arrives as a breakthrough. It comes as small recognitions, moments where you catch yourself feeling tense for no clear reason. Moments where you feel unexpectedly calm doing something very simple. Moments where you realize you've been forcing yourself through days instead of moving with them. This noticing can feel unsettling because once you see a pattern, you can't unsee it. And seeing it means you can no longer pretend nothing is happening. Many people stay lost longer than necessary, not because clarity is unavailable, but because clarity would require change. And change, even gentle change, threatens stability. Stability has a strange power over us. Even when it doesn't make us happy, it makes us feel safe. Predictable routines, predictable roles, predictable identities. They give us something solid to hold on to. So when your inner experience starts to shift, your first instinct is often to hold tighter to the external structure. You work harder. You commit more. You double down. You tell yourself that if you just try a little more, things will feel right again. But effort alone cannot fix misalignment. It only hides it for a while. Another layer of feeling lost comes from this internal contradiction. You crave freedom, but you fear losing control. You want meaning, but you fear uncertainty. So you end up living in a narrow space between the two. Not fully free, not fully safe. This tension creates mental noise. You replay conversations. You analyze decisions. You imagine alternate lives. Not because you want drama, but because something inside you is searching for truth. Truth about what actually fits you now, not what once fit, not what looks good from the outside, but what feels sustainable inside. This search can feel lonely because it is largely invisible. From the outside, nothing has changed. You still show up. You still perform. You still meet expectations. But internally, you are renegotiating your relationship with your life. That negotiation takes energy, and because it is internal, it often goes unrecognized. Others may see you as stable, responsible, put together. They don't see the quiet effort it takes to keep moving forward while questioning everything beneath the surface. This is why many people in their 30s feel tired in a way sleep cannot fix. It's not physical fatigue. It's the fatigue of holding two realities at once. The life you are living and the life you are sensing might be more honest. Holding that tension requires emotional labor, and emotional labor, when unacknowledged, drains you slowly. Another thing that often surfaces in this phase is fear. Not loud fear, not panic, but subtle fears that influence your decisions quietly. Fear of wasting time, fear of making the wrong move, fear of disappointing others, fear of starting over. These fears don't shout, they whisper. They say things like, maybe this is as good as it gets. Don't risk what you already have. You should be grateful. And gratitude, when used improperly, becomes a cage. Gratitude is meant to soften your heart, not silence your truth. You can appreciate what you have and still want something different. Those two things are not opposites, but many people believe they are. So they suppress desire in the name of responsibility. And suppressed desire doesn't disappear. It turns into restlessness. It shows up as irritability, as disengagement, as a sense of going through its motions. You might notice yourself becoming less present, not because you don't care, but because caring without alignment hurts. So you pull back a little. You detach just enough to get through the day. This detachment can be mistaken for laziness or lack of motivation, but often it is self-protection. Your system is trying to conserve energy, because pushing forward without meaning is costly. Another realization that can be uncomfortable is this: you may be living according to values you never consciously chose. Values absorbed from family, from culture, from survival needs. They served you once. They helped you build something. They helped you feel secure. But values are not permanent. They evolve as you do. And when your values shift, your life needs to adjust. If it doesn't, friction appears. That friction is the feeling of being lost. Not because you don't know who you are, but because who you are is changing. Change, however, threatens identity, and identity feels like home, even when it no longer fits. So you stay, you adapt, you compromise. You tell yourself this is what adulthood looks like. But adulthood is not meant to feel like quiet resignation. It is meant to feel grounded. And grounding feels different from settling. Settling has a heaviness to it. Grounding has a calm. If you pay attention, you can feel the difference. One drains you, the other steadies you. Another important question to sit with is this: do you feel like you are choosing your life or managing it? Management is about maintenance, keeping things running, avoiding disruption. Choice is about alignment, accepting trade-offs, taking responsibility for direction. Many people shift from choice to management without realizing it. Life becomes something to handle, not something to inhabit. You organize, you optimize, you endure. But inhabiting your life requires presence, and presence requires that you actually want to be where you are. If you don't, your system feels it, and it communicates through discomfort. That discomfort is not an enemy, it is information. But information is only useful if you listen. Listening does not mean reacting immediately. It means staying curious, asking gentle questions instead of forcing answers. Questions like, what part of my life feels heavy right now? What am I doing out of obligation rather than alignment? What am I afraid would happen if I stopped forcing this? These questions don't demand action. They invite awareness, and awareness slowly shifts how you relate to your life. You may not change anything right away, but you stop gaslighting yourself. You stop telling yourself you shouldn't feel the way you do. That alone creates space. Space to breathe. Space to feel. Space to notice. And in that space, something important begins to form. Not a plan, not a solution, but a clearer relationship with yourself. You begin to trust your inner signals again: the subtle yes, the quiet no, the heaviness, the lightness. These signals were always there. They were just drowned out by noise. Noise of expectations, noise of comparison, noise of urgency. When the noise quiets, even slightly, direction begins to emerge. Not as a destination, but as a direction of energy, toward what feels honest, away from what feels forced. This is not dramatic, it is subtle, but subtle shifts are sustainable, and sustainability matters more than intensity, especially in this season of life, because you are no longer experimenting randomly, you are shaping how you want to live long term. And that requires patience, not with the world, but with yourself, because clarity unfolds at the pace of honesty, and honesty cannot be rushed. As you stay with this awareness longer, something else begins to soften. Your need to control everything. Control once felt necessary. It helped you survive. It helped you succeed. It helped you stay safe. But now, control feels tight. You notice how much energy it takes to keep things predictable, to keep outcomes certain, to keep yourself within familiar boundaries. And you begin to see that much of your exhaustion comes from this effort. The effort to make life make sense all the time. But life is not meant to be fully understood before it is lived. At some point, control stops being a strength and starts becoming a limitation. This is often when people begin to feel lost, because letting go of control feels like losing direction. But in reality, it is often the beginning of a deeper kind of direction, one that is not based on fear, but on trust. Trust does not mean blind optimism. It means being willing to stay present even when outcomes are unclear. And that is uncomfortable, especially for people who value thinking, planning, and foresight. You might notice how quickly your mind jumps ahead, trying to solve, trying to predict, trying to protect you. This is not a flaw. It is a habit formed through years of responsibility, but habits can soften. You don't have to silence your mind. You only need to stop letting it dominate every decision. Another quiet shift happens when you allow yourself to grieve. Grieve the version of life you thought you would have. Grieve the timelines you believed in. Grieve the certainty you expected to feel by now. This grief is subtle. It doesn't announce itself. It sits quietly beneath your daily routines. And because it has no clear object, it often goes unacknowledged. But unacknowledged grief weighs on you. It shows up as confusion, as restlessness, as a sense of emotional distance. Allowing yourself to feel it doesn't make you weaker. It makes you honest. And honesty brings relief. You may notice that once you stop fighting the feeling of being lost, it changes. It becomes less sharp, less urgent. Not because you suddenly know what to do, but because you stop judging yourself for not knowing. Judgment adds pressure. Pressure narrows perspective. When pressure lifts, perspective widens. You start seeing your life not as a problem to solve, but as a process to participate in. This shift is small but powerful. Participation feels different from performance. Performance is about appearance. Participation is about presence. For a long time, you may have been performing your life well, meeting expectations, playing roles, maintaining consistency. But participation asks something else from you. It asks you to actually be there, to feel your days, to notice your reactions, to listen to your internal responses. This doesn't require dramatic change. It requires attention. And attention changes everything. You might notice that some things you thought mattered no longer hold the same weight. Certain goals feel hollow. Certain conversations feel repetitive. Certain ambitions feel borrowed. At the same time, small things begin to matter more. Quiet mornings, unstructured time, honest conversations, moments of ease. This is not regression, it is refinement. Your system is recalibrating what is essential, and recalibration can feel disorienting because what you once chased with intensity now feels optional, and what you once ignored now feels important. This reversal can make you question yourself. You might wonder if you are losing drive, losing ambition, losing edge. But often, you are not losing anything. You are shedding excess. Excess pressure, excess comparison, excess noise. What remains is quieter, but more sustainable. Another important realization is this: you don't have to have a clear future vision to live a meaningful present. Many people postpone presence while waiting for clarity. They tell themselves, I'll relax once I figure things out. But figuring things out is not a destination. It is an ongoing process. If you wait for certainty before allowing yourself to be present, you may miss your life entirely. Presence does not require answers. It requires willingness. Willingness to stay with what is. Willingness to feel discomfort without escaping it. Willingness to let questions exist without forcing conclusions. This willingness builds inner stability, not the kind that depends on circumstances, but the kind that comes from self-trust. Self-trust grows when you listen to yourself and respond with respect. Not necessarily with action, but with acknowledgement. When you acknowledge your inner experience, you stop fighting yourself. And when you stop fighting yourself, energy returns. Not explosive energy, not motivation fueled by pressure, but a quiet, steady energy, the kind that allows you to take small steps without needing guarantees. Small steps matter. They don't need to be visible to others. They don't need to be impressive. They only need to be honest. Honesty is the true opposite of being lost. Not certainty, not confidence. Honesty. Honesty about what you feel. Honesty about what no longer fits. Honesty about what you are ready for and what you are not. As honesty deepens, your relationship with uncertainty changes. When uncertainty becomes less threatening, not because it disappears, but because you trust yourself to meet it. And trust changes how lost feels. Lost no longer feels like failure. It feels like openness. Openness to new definitions, new rhythms, new ways of living. You may not know exactly where you're going, but you begin to know how you want to move, with more gentleness, with more integrity, with more alignment. And that is enough for now. Because direction is not always about distance. Sometimes it is about orientation, facing toward what feels true, facing away from what feels forced. This orientation guides you quietly, day by day, choice by choice, until one day you realize you are no longer asking, "Why am I lost?" You are asking, "What feels right to take care of next?" And that question, simple as it sounds, is a form of clarity. Once this quieter clarity begins to settle in, your relationship with daily life starts to change. Not dramatically, not overnight, but in subtle, almost invisible ways. You begin to notice how much of your life is shaped by momentum rather than intention. You wake up and move through routines that were built over years, routines that once made sense, routines that once helped you survive. But now, some of them feel heavy, not wrong, just outdated. you realize that much of your tiredness does not come from doing too much, but from doing too much of what no longer matters. This realization can feel unsettling because it suggests that rest alone is not the solution. The solution is adjustment. Adjustment sounds small, but emotionally it can feel enormous because adjustment requires choice. And choice means admitting that something needs to change. At this stage, many people assume change has to be big to be real. A new job, a new city, a complete reinvention. But realignment often begins with something much quieter. It begins with rhythm, the rhythm of your days, the rhythm of your energy, the rhythm of how you give and how you recover. You start asking different questions. Not, what should I do with my life, but what drains me? What restores me? What feels neutral? What feels heavy? These questions don't demand dramatic action. They invite awareness. And awareness, when consistent, reshapes life naturally. You may notice that certain conversations leave you feeling smaller. Certain environments make you tense. Certain expectations pull you away from yourself. At the same time, you notice moments that feel simple but nourishing. A slow morning, a walk without a destination, a conversation where you don't need to explain yourself. These moments are not distractions from life. They are clues, clues about the pace your system needs now. Many people carry the pace of their 20s into their 30s without realizing it. A pace built on urgency, proving, acceleration. But your inner world has changed. It no longer thrives under constant pressure. So the same pace that once fueled growth now creates friction. Slowing down does not mean giving up. It means listening. Listening to the signals your body and mind have been sending quietly for a long time. Signals like tension, signals like numbness, signals like persistent fatigue. These are not weaknesses, they are communication. Your system is asking for recalibration. Another shift that happens in this phase is your relationship with time. Time is no longer something you try to fill, it becomes something you try to protect. You become more sensitive to how you spend your hours, not in a controlling way, but in a discerning way. You notice how easily time can be consumed by obligations that don't align with your values. You notice how rarely unstructured time appears in your schedule, and you begin to crave space. Space to think, space to feel, space to not perform. This craving is not laziness, it is maturity. Maturity understands that constant output without input leads to depletion. So you start making small adjustments. You say no more often. You leave earlier. You simplify commitments. These changes might look insignificant to others, but internally, they create relief. Relief is important because relief is where clarity grows. When you are constantly under pressure, your nervous system is too busy surviving to reflect. Relief creates room. Room for noticing. Room for perspective. Room for honest evaluation. Another important realization emerges around this time. You cannot build a meaningful life on borrowed priorities. For years, you may have chased goals because they were admired, because they were rewarded, because they made sense in a certain framework. But now, those goals feel distant. They no longer energize you. And this does not mean they were wrong. It means you have changed. Outgrowing goals is not failure. It is evolution. But evolution requires letting go. Letting go of identities. Letting go of narratives. Letting go of the version of success you were praised for. This letting go can feel like loss, because praise once gave you direction. Without it, you may feel unsure of your worth. So you must learn a different way of measuring value, not by output, not by recognition, but by alignment. Alignment feels quieter than achievement. It does not come with applause, but it comes with steadiness, with a sense that you are no longer fighting yourself. This steadiness is what many people mistake for boredom, but boredom is emptiness. Steadiness is fullness without noise. You begin to see that a good life is not necessarily an exciting one. It is a livable one, a life you can inhabit without constant self-negotiation. Another shift involves boundaries. In earlier years, boundaries often felt rigid or unnecessary. You either had none or you built them like walls. Now, boundaries become more nuanced. They are not about control. They are about care. Care for your energy. Care for your attention. Care for your emotional bandwidth. You realize that not everything deserves access to you. Not every request. Not every opportunity. Not every expectation. Saying no becomes less about rejection and more about preservation. Preservation of what matters. And what matters is becoming clearer. Not through thinking harder, but through living more honestly. You might notice that you are less interested in explaining yourself. You no longer need to justify every choice, because explanation was often a form of self-defense. Now, you trust your inner signals enough to act quietly. This quiet confidence is different from the confidence you had before. Before, confidence came from certainty. Now it comes from self-trust. Self-trust does not require clarity about the future. It requires integrity in the present, doing what feels right, even when it is not impressive, even when it is not understood. This phase of life invites you to simplify, not by removing everything, but by choosing carefully. Choosing what you carry forward, choosing what you release. And this choosing is ongoing. It is not a single decision. It is a practice, a daily practice of checking in with yourself, of asking, does this still fit? Does this still matter? Does this still feel honest? These questions don't create chaos. They create coherence. And coherence is what replaces the feeling of being lost, not all at once, but gradually. As your days begin to feel more aligned with your inner rhythm, as your energy returns in small, steady ways, as your life begins to feel less like something you manage and more like something you inhabit. This is not the end of confusion, but it is the beginning of grounding, and grounding changes everything. As this grounding deepens, you begin to experience your life from a different center, not from urgency, not from fear, but from a quieter place of discernment. You start to notice that you no longer react to everything. Some things that once pulled you into stress now pass through without leaving much trace. This is not indifference, it is selectivity. Selectivity is a form of wisdom. You are learning where to place your attention. And attention, more than time or money, is your most limited resource. When you were younger, you gave it freely, sometimes carelessly, sometimes desperately. Now you are more careful, not because you are closed, but because you are aware. You see that attention shapes experience. What you consistently attend to becomes your inner world. So you begin to choose more deliberately. You spend less time on things that inflame comparison, less energy on conversations that circle without depth, less effort trying to meet standards that feel hollow. This does not make life smaller. It makes it clearer. Clarity often arrives when excess falls away, not because you forced it, but because you stopped feeding it. Another important shift is how you relate to imperfection. Earlier in life, imperfection felt like something to fix, a flaw, a weakness, a problem. Now, imperfection feels inevitable, human, expected. You stop waiting for the perfect conditions to live honestly. You stop postponing contentment until everything makes sense. Because you realize that perfection is not a destination, it is a delay, a way of avoiding presence. As you accept imperfection, you also accept that life will always contain some uncertainty, some ambiguity, some unresolved questions. And instead of resisting that, you make room for it. You let questions exist without constantly interrogating them. This creates inner spaciousness, space where creativity can return, where curiosity can breathe, where joy can appear unexpectedly. Joy, at this stage, is quieter. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand attention. It arrives as ease, as moments where you feel at home in yourself. This ease is fragile at first. It comes and goes, but over time, it becomes more stable. Not because life becomes easier, but because you become less at war with it. Another realization emerges around control of outcomes. You begin to see that many of the things you worried about either resolved themselves or were never fully in your control to begin with. This insight softens your grip. You still care, you still plan, you still take responsibility, but you stop trying to guarantee results. Guarantees were always an illusion. What you can influence is your orientation, how you show up, how you respond, how you choose. This orientation shapes your experience more than outcomes ever did. When you release the need for certainty, you regain flexibility. Flexibility allows you to adapt without breaking. It allows you to change direction without self-betrayal. It allows you to be responsive rather than reactive. Another quiet benefit of this phase is deeper compassion, not just for others, but for yourself. You start seeing your past choices with more kindness. You understand why you did what you did. You stop judging yourself for not knowing what you know now. This self-compassion is grounding, because shame keeps you stuck. Understanding allows movement. You may notice that your internal dialogue changes. Less criticism, more curiosity. Instead of asking, "What is wrong with me?" you ask, "What is this trying to show me?" This shift in questioning changes everything, because problems framed with curiosity invite learning instead of punishment. As a result, you feel less lost. Not because you have answers, but because you trust the process of finding them. Trust grows slowly, through consistency, through listening, through responding with care. You also begin to accept that some seasons of life are meant for integration, not expansion. Not every chapter is about growth in visible ways. Some chapters are about digestion, digesting experiences, digesting lessons, digesting changes in identity. Integration is quiet work. It doesn't show up on resumes. It doesn't impress others. But it stabilizes you. It prepares the ground for future movement. Without integration, growth becomes chaotic. With integration, growth becomes sustainable. You begin to respect your own timing. You stop comparing your inner process to someone else's outer milestones. You see that life unfolds in spirals, not straight lines. You revisit themes at deeper levels. You relearn lessons with more nuance. So you understand yourself with greater clarity. This does not mean you are stuck. It means you are deepening. Depth often looks like stillness from the outside, but inside, a great deal is happening. You are becoming more yourself, not in a loud, performative way, but in a grounded, embodied way. You feel less pressure to prove, more desire to be present, more willingness to choose what nourishes you, even if it looks simple. You start trusting that a good life does not need to be dramatic. It needs to be livable. You begin designing your days around what supports your nervous system, your values, your sense of meaning. This design is ongoing. It evolves as you do, and it does not remove uncertainty, but it makes uncertainty less threatening because you know how to meet it with patience, with honesty, with care. So by now, the feeling of being lost has transformed. It is no longer a heavy confusion. It is a gentle openness, an openness that allows change without forcing it, an openness that allows direction without rigidity. You may still not know exactly where you are going, but you know how you want to live while finding out. And that knowledge is grounding. It steadies you. It anchors you in the present. And from that anchored place, movement becomes possible again. Not rushed, not pressured, but aligned. And alignment, more than certainty, is what makes life feel like it belongs to you. At some point in adulthood, you stop asking big dramatic questions about life. Not because they no longer matter, but because you're too busy surviving to ask them properly. Your days fill up. Your calendar looks responsible. Your life becomes efficient. And quietly, without any clear moment of collapse, your inner world starts to shrink. Not disappear, just narrow. You still think, you still feel, but only in short windows between obligations. And when you do notice the discomfort, you often brush it aside with a familiar sentence. This is just how life is. But here is something rarely said out loud. Many people are not unhappy. They are misaligned. They are living lives that technically work, but emotionally don't fit anymore. The structure is fine, the direction feels wrong, and misalignment is dangerous precisely because it's subtle. It doesn't break you, it drains you, slowly, politely, without drama. You wake up tired, even after resting. You lose interest in conversations that used to excite you. You feel irritated by small things, but can't explain why. And because nothing is obviously wrong, you assume the problem must be you. You try harder, you push through, you silence the inner resistance. But resistance doesn't disappear when ignored. It turns inward. It becomes numbness. It becomes cynicism. It becomes that quiet distance you feel from your own life. This is when people start confusing discipline with self-abandonment. They tell themselves, I just need to be stronger. I shouldn't complain. I need to stay consistent. And consistency becomes a cage. Not because consistency is bad, but because it's no longer connected to meaning. You're being consistent with habits that no longer serve who you are now. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Growth changes your capacity. What once felt challenging may now feel suffocating. What once felt exciting may now feel loud and empty. But we rarely update our lives at the same speed we update ourselves. So we keep living in structures built for an older version of us. And that creates friction, internal friction. You feel it when silence feels heavier than noise. When weekends feel too short, even when you don't do much. When success stops feeling satisfying, and the world doesn't help. Because the world praises endurance. It applauds hustle. It celebrates people who keep going, no matter the cost. Very few people ask, at what cost? And even fewer people allow themselves to answer honestly, because honest answers force change, and change risks disappointment. Disappointment from others, and sometimes from the version of yourself who believed endurance was the point. There is a deep fear many adults carry but rarely name, the fear that if they slow down, they will realize they've been running in the wrong direction. So they stay busy, they stay distracted, they stay productive. Not because it fulfills them, but because it keeps the deeper questions quiet. But those questions don't disappear. They wait. They show up in moments of stillness. Late at night, early in the morning, during long walks or quiet drives. They ask things like, is this the life I would choose again? If no one was watching, what would I change? Why do I feel like I'm always preparing for a future that never arrives? These questions are not signs of weakness. They are signs of awareness. Awareness that your life is asking to be lived more consciously. But consciousness requires courage, because awareness reveals trade-offs. It shows you that every yes has been a no to something else. Every commitment has shaped your identity. Every routine has reinforced a direction. And changing direction doesn't mean you failed. It means you noticed. Yet many people confuse noticing with regret. They think, if I admit this doesn't fit anymore, then everything before it was a mistake. But life doesn't work like that. What fit before can stop fitting. What served you once can become a burden later. That doesn't erase its value. It simply means you've changed. And change is not betrayal. It's movement. Still, movement feels risky when you've built a life around stability. So instead of changing externally, people start shrinking internally. They lower expectations. They reduce curiosity. They stop dreaming openly. They become efficient versions of themselves, reliable, capable, predictable, and quietly disconnected. You may notice this disconnection in how you relate to time. Time no longer feels expansive. It feels scarce, compressed. You're always catching up, always behind, always almost there. And there keeps moving. This creates a constant low-level anxiety, not panic, just pressure. The pressure to keep up, to not fall behind, to maintain what you've built. And maintenance becomes your full-time job. Not building, not exploring, just maintaining. Maintaining appearances, maintaining income, maintaining expectations. And while maintenance is necessary, it cannot be the whole story. A life built only on maintenance slowly loses vitality. It becomes something you manage, not something you inhabit. This is often when people start fantasizing about escape, not dramatic escape, small ones, daydreams about simpler lives, about starting over, about disappearing for a while. These fantasies aren't childish, they're signals. Signals that your nervous system is tired of constant vigilance, tired of being on, tired of performing competence, tired of holding everything together. And rest alone doesn't fix this, because what you need is not just rest, it's recalibration. A chance to ask, what actually matters to me now? Not 5 years ago. Not when you made certain promises. Not when you were trying to prove something. Now. And that question is harder than it sounds, because your current life is the result of past priorities. And questioning it feels like questioning your past self. But maturity isn't about defending your past. It's about listening to your present. And your present is speaking through fatigue, through boredom, through irritation, through longing. These are not flaws. They are feedback. Feedback that something in your life needs attention. Not fixing. Attention. Attention without judgment. Without urgency. Without pressure to immediately change everything. Just attention. Because before you can redesign your life, you have to understand it. You have to notice where your energy goes, what drains you, what quietly restores you. You have to notice which parts of your day feel alive and which feel heavy. And this noticing cannot be rushed. Rushing is what created the misalignment in the first place. Slowing down here is not falling behind. It's returning to yourself. And that return doesn't happen all at once. It happens through small, honest moments. Moments where you admit, this no longer fits. These matters more than I thought. I've outgrown this. And outgrowing something doesn't mean you're ungrateful. It means you're alive. Because growth doesn't ask for permission. It happens quietly, internally, before your life catches up. The question is not whether you've changed. You have. The question is whether your life is allowed to change with you. And the question of whether your life is allowed to change with you is one that many people avoid for years. Because allowing change means renegotiating identity. It means admitting that the version of you who built this life is not the same version standing inside it now. And that realization can feel disorienting. You may ask yourself, if I let go of this routine, who am I without it? If I step away from this role, what replaces it? If I stop striving in this direction, does that mean I wasted time? These questions feel heavy because they touch something deeper than logistics. They touch meaning. And meaning is not something you can optimize. It has to be felt. That's why spreadsheets don't help here. Neither do productivity hacks. What helps is honesty. Slow, uncomfortable honesty. Honesty about what energizes you. Honesty about what drains you. Honesty about what you're doing out of habit and what you're doing out of genuine care. Many adults are living lives that are technically successful, but emotionally undernourished. They have skills, but no curiosity. Stability, but no vitality. Comfort, but no intimacy with themselves. And because everything looks fine, they tell themselves they're asking for too much. But wanting alignment is not asking for too much. It's asking for coherence. Coherence between what you value and how you spend your time. Between who you are becoming and what you keep repeating. When coherence is missing, life feels noisy even when it's quiet. You feel restless during calm moments. You feel bored even when busy. You feel disconnected even when surrounded by people. And disconnection is exhausting. Not because you're doing too much, but because you're doing too much of what doesn't reflect you anymore. This is where many people mistake discomfort for failure. They assume that feeling uneasy means they chose wrong. That doubt means they're weak. That questioning means instability. But discomfort often appears not when you're failing, but when you're ready to refine. Refinement is different from starting over. It doesn't require burning everything down. It requires adjustment. Small, intentional shifts. Choosing fewer commitments, but showing up more fully to the ones you keep. Letting go of conversations that revolve around comparison and seeking ones that allow reflection. Creating margins in your day, not to be more productive, but to be more present. Presence is the quiet skill adulthood demands, but rarely teaches. Being present means you stop living in anticipation. You stop waiting for the next phase to begin. You stop telling yourself, once I get through this, then I'll live. You realize that this keeps changing and life keeps passing. So you start asking different questions. Not, how can I do more? But, how can I do this in a way that doesn't cost me myself? Not, what's the fastest path? But, what's the most sustainable rhythm? Sustainability is deeply unglamorous. It doesn't come with dramatic transformations. It comes with consistency that respects your limits. And limits are not flaws. They are information. They tell you how much you can give without disappearing. They tell you where your boundaries need reinforcement. They tell you when to stop negotiating with exhaustion. Many people think adulthood is about becoming tougher, but often it's about becoming more precise. More precise with your energy, more precise with your time, more precise with your emotional investments. You stop scattering yourself everywhere. You start choosing where you belong, and belonging begins internally. So it begins when you stop arguing with your own signals, when you stop explaining away discomfort, when you stop overriding intuition in the name of logic. Logic can justify almost anything, but intuition remembers what you need. Not loudly, not urgently, just steadily. You might notice that as you honor this inner guidance, your life starts to feel quieter. Not emptier. Quieter. Less internal debate. Less self-criticism. Less background tension. You still face challenges. You still get tired. But the tiredness feels cleaner. It comes from effort, not resistance. And resistance is what drains people the most. Resistance to their own truth. Resistance to slowing down. Resistance to evolving beyond old narratives. When you release that resistance, you don't suddenly find all the answers, but you stop fighting the questions. And that alone creates relief. You begin to trust that clarity doesn't arrive all at once. It arrives in layers, through noticing, through adjusting, through paying attention to how you feel after choices, not just how they look from the outside. You learn that alignment is not a destination. It's a practice, a daily practice of checking in, of recalibrating, of choosing again. Some days you'll slip back into old patterns. That doesn't mean you failed. It means those patterns were once useful. You thank them and return to the present, because the present is where your life actually exists, not in the future you're preparing for, not in the past you're defending. Here. And living here requires courage of a quiet kind, the courage to be honest without drama, the courage to change without announcement, the courage to grow without needing validation. This kind of courage doesn't impress crowds, but it builds a life that feels real, a life you don't need to escape from, a life you can inhabit fully, even on ordinary days. And maybe that's the real shift of adulthood. Not becoming someone extraordinary, but becoming someone aligned. Someone whose outer life no longer constantly argues with their inner world. Someone who understands that peace is not the absence of effort, but the absence of self-betrayal. And that understanding doesn't arrive suddenly. It settles in quietly as you keep choosing to listen, to adjust, to live with intention. One day at a time, one day at a time. That phrase sounds simple, almost too simple to be taken seriously. But when you reach this stage of life, and you realize how rare it actually is to live that way. Most people live one day at a time, only on the surface. Inside, they are living months ahead, years ahead, always preparing, always bracing, always waiting, waiting for things to calm down, waiting for the next milestone, waiting for permission to finally feel at ease. And that waiting quietly steals the present. You don't notice it happening because it looks responsible, it looks mature, it looks like you're doing the right thing. But inside, something stays tense, like you're holding your breath without realizing it. This tension becomes your baseline. You wake up with it. You carry it through the day. You fall asleep with it. And because it's constant, you stop questioning it. You call it adulthood. But adulthood is not supposed to feel like permanent self-suppression. It's not supposed to feel like you're endlessly postponing yourself. Yet many people do exactly that. They postpone rest. They postpone joy. They postpone curiosity. They postpone honesty. They tell themselves, after this project, after this phase, after things are more stable, and after keeps moving. So life becomes something you manage, not something you experience. You become very good at functioning and slowly forget how to feel alive inside your own routine. This is where slow living is often misunderstood. It's not about doing less for the sake of doing less. It's not about rejecting ambition. It's not about escaping responsibility. It's about restoring relationship. A relationship with time, with attention, with yourself. Slow pace doesn't mean passive. It means intentional. It means you stop letting urgency decide everything for you. Because urgency is a terrible life designer. Urgency cares only about speed, not meaning, not sustainability, not truth. When urgency runs your life, everything feels important, and nothing feels deeply fulfilling. You're constantly reacting, rarely choosing, and reaction slowly replaces agency. Agency is the feeling that your life is something you're actively participating in, not something happening to you. Without agency, even success feels hollow. You may achieve things, but they don't land. They don't settle. They don't nourish. Because they weren't chosen from alignment. They were chosen from pressure. And pressure shapes lives that look impressive, but feel brittle. One unexpected change, one moment of stillness, one honest question, and the structure starts to shake. That's why so many people fear slowing down. Not because they're lazy, but because they're afraid of what they might notice. Slowing down removes distractions. It removes excuses. It removes noise. And what's left is you, your thoughts, your feelings, your unanswered questions. At first, this feels uncomfortable, even unsettling, because you realize how long you've been avoiding yourself. But avoidance is exhausting, and exhaustion is not a sustainable way to live. When you begin to slow your pace, you don't suddenly feel peaceful. You feel exposed. Exposed to fatigue you ignored. Exposed to desires you postponed. Exposed to grief for versions of yourself you outgrew. This exposure is not a failure. It's a transition. It's the nervous system learning that it no longer has to stay in survival mode. And survival mode is subtle in adulthood. It doesn't look like panic. It looks like constant alertness, always checking, always adjusting, always anticipating problems before they happen. You become efficient at preventing discomfort, but terrible at experiencing joy. Joy requires presence, and presence requires safety. Not external safety, but internal permission. Permission to slow your breathing. Permission to pause without justification. Permission to exist without producing. Many adults never give themselves this permission because they tied their worth to momentum. As long as they are moving, they feel valuable. As soon as they stop, they feel uneasy. This is not because rest is wrong. It's because stillness reveals how much of your identity was built on motion. So slowing down becomes an identity shift, not a lifestyle hack. You are no longer the person who says yes automatically, no longer the person who fills silence with productivity, no longer the person who proves worth through endurance. And this change doesn't announce itself, it shows up quietly. You start declining things without elaborate explanations. You stop rushing to fill every gap in your schedule. You allow moments of nothing. At first, those moments feel empty. Then they start to feel spacious. And in that space, you begin to hear yourself again. Not the loud voice of ambition, not the anxious voice of comparison, but the steady voice underneath. The one that knows when something is too much. The one that recognizes when something is enough. The one that understands that more is not always better. This voice has always been there. It was just drowned out by noise. Slow pace gives it room. And as it grows clearer, your choices begin to shift. You stop asking, "What should I be doing?" and start asking, "What do I actually want to give my life to?" This question doesn't demand immediate answers. It invites exploration. Exploration without deadlines, without performance, without needing to impress anyone. And that kind of exploration feels unfamiliar to many adults, because their lives have been structured around certainty, around plans, around predictable outcomes. But certainty is comforting only when it aligns with who you are. When it doesn't, it becomes suffocating. So the work of this stage of life is not to find the perfect plan. It's to create a rhythm you can live inside, a rhythm that respects your energy, that allows for recovery, that leaves space for reflection. Because reflection is not indulgent, it's essential. Without reflection, you repeat patterns unconsciously. You drift into lives by default. You wake up years later wondering how you got there. Reflection slows time. Not literally, but experientially. It makes moments feel fuller, days feel more intentional, life feel less rushed. And this doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you care differently. You care about depth instead of breadth, about quality instead of quantity, about alignment instead of approval. And alignment changes how effort feels. Effort no longer feels like self-erasure. It feels like contribution. You can work hard without feeling depleted, because the work reflects you. You can say no without guilt, because your yeses are clearer. You can rest without anxiety, because rest becomes part of the rhythm, not a reward you earn only after exhaustion. This is the kind of adulthood few people talk about. Not dramatic, not flashy, not optimized for external validation, but grounded. And grounding doesn't make life perfect. It makes it inhabitable. You still face uncertainty. You still experience loss. You still have days of doubt. But you're no longer constantly fighting yourself. You stop treating life as something to conquer and start relating to it as something to participate in. That shift changes everything. Not overnight. Not all at once. But gradually, as your pace slows, your clarity deepens. And clarity doesn't shout. It settles. It shows you what matters. Not through urgency, but through resonance. Things either feel aligned or they don't. And you learn to trust that feeling, even when it's inconvenient. Even when it asks you to let go of familiar structures. Because familiarity is not the same as safety. And safety is not the same as peace. Peace comes from coherence, from living in a way that doesn't constantly require self-negotiation. And that coherence begins when you allow yourself to move at a pace that lets you stay connected to who you are becoming. To who you are becoming. Because becoming is not a straight line, it's a conversation. A conversation between who you were, who you are, and who you are slowly growing into. When you rush that conversation, you miss its meaning. You start living from habit instead of awareness, from expectation instead of intention. And intention is what gives life texture. Without it, days blur together, weeks disappear, years pass quietly, not because nothing happened, but because nothing was fully felt. Slow pace invites feeling back into this picture, not dramatic emotion, just presence. The presence to notice how your body responds to certain environments, how your mind relaxes around certain people, how your energy shifts depending on what you say yes to. These signals are subtle, but they are consistent. And consistency is how truth communicates. When something consistently drains you, that is information. When something consistently restores you, that is information. Ignoring this information doesn't make you stronger. It makes you disconnected. Many people pride themselves on pushing through discomfort, and sometimes that is necessary. But there's a difference between productive discomfort and misaligned discomfort. Productive discomfort stretches you. Misaligned discomfort erodes you. The first leaves you tired but fulfilled. The second leaves you tired and empty. Learning to tell the difference is one of the quiet skills adulthood demands. And it takes time. Time spent observing yourself honestly, without judgment, without the need to immediately fix anything, just noticing patterns. Patterns in how you spend your mornings, patterns in how you react to stress, patterns in what you avoid and what you move toward naturally. These patterns tell a story, not a story about what you should do, but about what you need. And needs don't disappear when unmet. They accumulate. They show up as irritability, as fatigue, as a vague sense of dissatisfaction. You can't explain. Slow living is not about romanticizing simplicity. It's about responding to accumulated signals before they turn into burnout. It's about intervening early, gently, instead of waiting for collapse. Many adults wait for a breaking point before they allow themselves to change. They wait until their health suffers, until their relationships strain, until their joy disappears completely. As if permission must be earned through pain. But you don't need to reach the edge to choose a different pace. You don't need a crisis to justify recalibration. You are allowed to adjust simply because something no longer feels right. That permission is internal. No one else can give it to you. And when you take it, life doesn't suddenly become clear, but it becomes honest. Honesty simplifies things. You stop pretending certain things don't affect you. You stop forcing enthusiasm. You stop agreeing out of obligation. You start telling the truth quietly, through your choices. You may notice your life becoming smaller on the outside. Fewer commitments, fewer explanations, fewer distractions. But inside, it becomes richer, more spacious, more grounded, more yours. This is the paradox of slowing down. You appear to be doing less, but you are actually living more. More present moments, more intentional effort, more authentic connection. And authenticity has a calming effect. It reduces inner conflict. It reduces mental noise. It reduces the constant need to justify yourself. You no longer need to convince anyone that your life makes sense, because it makes sense to you. That sense making is not intellectual, it's embodied. In how you feel it in how your shoulders relax, in how your breath deepens, in how silence no longer feels threatening. Silence becomes a companion, not an enemy. And in silence, you discover that you don't need to be in a hurry. Life unfolds whether you rush it or not. Rushing only determines how much of it you miss. This doesn't mean abandoning goals. It means choosing goals that don't require self-betrayal. It means allowing ambition to be guided by values, not fear. Fear asks, what if I fall behind? Values ask, what is worth my time? And those are very different questions. When values lead, your pace naturally adjusts. You work when it matters. You rest when it's needed. You pause when clarity is missing. You stop equating speed with seriousness. You realize that depth requires time. Understanding requires patience. Meaning requires space. And space is something you have to protect, because the world will always try to fill it. With notifications, with expectations, with comparisons. Protecting space is not withdrawal. It's stewardship. You are taking care of your attention, your energy, your inner life. And that care ripples outward. You become more patient, more attentive, more available in the moments that count, because you're no longer scattered everywhere else. This is what slow pace ultimately gives you. Not an easier life, but a truer one. A life where effort feels aligned, where rest feels deserved, where presence feels possible. And maybe that's the quiet promise of this path, that you don't have to outrun time to live well within it, that you don't have to prove your worth through exhaustion, that you are allowed to live at a rhythm that lets you recognize yourself as you move through your days. If this way of thinking resonates with you, if these words feel like they're describing something you've been sensing but couldn't quite name, then you're not alone. There are many people quietly searching for a calmer, more honest way to live. If you want to keep exploring these ideas, to reflect more deeply on life, pace, and inner alignment, you can support this work by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. It helps this space grow and allows more conversations like this to reach the people who need them.